On the morning of December 30th, 2006, two very different videos documented the final moments of Saddam Hussein. The first, released by the Iraqi government, shows a somber, almost clinical execution. The former dictator walks calmly to the gallows. Officials conduct themselves with restraint. The noose is placed. The trapdoor opens. It looks like justice delivered with dignity. But within hours, a second video surfaced. This one, captured on a cell phone by a guard in the execution chamber, tells a completely different story. In this footage, you hear voices chanting the name of a rival Shiite leader. You hear sectarian taunts. You hear Saddam responding defiantly. You hear chaos. Two cameras, same execution, two entirely different narratives, one carefully controlled by a government trying to project legitimacy. The other raw, unfiltered, and devastating to that very claim. This is the story of how a cell phone video unraveled the official account of one of modern history's most consequential executions, and turned what was supposed to be a moment of closure into a symbol of Iraq's deepest divisions. To understand why these two videos mattered so much, we need to go back to the beginning. Saddam Hussein Abd al-Majid al-Takriti became president of Iraq in July 1979. For 24 years, he ruled through a combination of brutal repression, personality cult, and strategic violence. His regime's crimes are well documented by organizations including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. During the Anfal campaign of 1988, Iraqi forces used chemical weapons against Kurdish villages, killing an estimated 50,000 to 180,000 civilians, according to Human Rights Watch reports. The attack on Halabja alone killed approximately 5,000 people in a single day. Then there was the Dujal massacre. In July 1982, after a failed assassination attempt against Saddam in the town of Dujal, his security forces arrested hundreds of residents. According to evidence later presented at trial and documented by the Iraqi Special Tribunal, 148 people were executed. Orchards were destroyed. Families were sent to desert detention camps. It was collective punishment, systematic and documented. When the United States invaded Iraq in March 2003, one of the stated objectives was removing Saddam Hussein from power. The regime collapsed quickly. Baghdad fell in April, but Saddam himself vanished. What followed was one of the most intensive manhunts in modern military history. The United States military created a deck of playing cards featuring the 55 most wanted members of the Iraqi regime. Saddam was the ace of spades. Intelligence teams worked around the clock. Raids were conducted throughout Iraq's Sunni heartland. Former regime members were interrogated. Family connections were mapped. Financial networks were traced. The pressure increased month after month. By December 2003, after 9 months of searching, American forces had narrowed the search to an area near Tikrit, Saddam's hometown. Intelligence suggested he was moving between safe houses, relying on a small circle of trusted relatives and former bodyguards. On December 13, 2003, 600 soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division and Special Operations Forces launched Operation Red Dawn. The operation targeted 2 sites near the town of Ad-Dawar, about 15 kilometers south of Tikrit. According to declassified materials from the National Security Archive, the sites were code-named Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2. Wolverine 1 yielded nothing. At Wolverine 2, a modest farm compound, soldiers initially found the site apparently abandoned. Then they noticed something odd. In a small courtyard, partially concealed by bricks, dirt, and a styrofoam block, was an opening. A ventilation pipe protruded slightly. When soldiers cleared the debris, they found a spider hole. It was approximately 6 to 8 feet deep. At the bottom, they found Saddam Hussein. The contrast could not have been more striking. This was a man who had lived in palaces with gold-plated bathroom fixtures, marble floors imported from Italy, crystal chandeliers in every room. A man who maintained dozens of presidential compounds across Iraq. A man whose birthday was a national holiday. And here he was, pulled from a hole barely big enough to lie down in. He had a pistol but did not resist. He had $750 in cash. He looked disheveled, his famous black mustache now gray and unkempt. American soldiers later reported he said, quote, "I am Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq, and I want to negotiate," unquote. The soldiers replied they were there to take him into custody. The manhunt was over. The photographs and video from that capture became some of the most distributed images of the early 21st century. A medic examined Saddam, looking into his mouth, checking for concealed weapons or suicide devices. The footage was shown around the world. For many Iraqis who had suffered under his rule, seeing their former dictator reduced to this state was a profound psychological moment. He had presented himself as invincible. Now he looked like any other fugitive, powerless and captured. But the humiliation of capture was only the beginning. Saddam was transferred to American military custody. He was held at Camp Cropper, a detention facility near Baghdad International Airport. For the next 3 years, he would be detained there while an Iraqi court prepared to try him. But try him for what exactly? His regime had committed so many documented crimes over so many years that prosecutors had to decide which cases to prioritize. They chose to begin with Dujal, the massacre from 1982. It was well documented. Survivors could testify. Physical evidence existed. And it was, in a sense, one of the smaller atrocities which made it legally manageable. The logic was that if they could successfully prosecute and convict Saddam for Dujal, they could then proceed to trials for larger crimes like Anfal. The Iraqi Special Tribunal was established with support from the United States, but was officially an Iraqi institution. The trial began on October 19, 2005. From the very first session, it was chaotic. Saddam refused to recognize the court's legitimacy, calling it a theater. He and his co-defendants disrupted proceedings, shouting, walking out, going on hunger strikes. But the chaos was not limited to the defendants. 3 defense lawyers were murdered during the trial. According to Human Rights Watch in their report titled Judging Dujal, the killings created an atmosphere of fear that compromised the defendants' right to adequate legal representation. The presiding judge was replaced mid-trial after complaints he was too lenient with Saddam's outbursts. The replacement judge, Rauf Abdul Rahman, took a firmer hand but faced his own criticisms. International legal experts raised serious concerns about the fairness of the proceedings. Philip Alston, at the time the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial, Summary, or Arbitrary Executions, stated that the trial was marred by serious irregularities. He specifically criticized the government's failure to protect defense lawyers, the appearance of political influence, and the rushed nature of the proceedings. Human Rights Watch, in their detailed analysis, concluded that while the evidence of Saddam's guilt for the Dujal massacre was strong, the trial itself did not meet international standards for fairness. The defense was often denied adequate time to prepare. Key evidence was sometimes introduced without proper opportunity for the defense to review it. And the atmosphere of intimidation, with lawyers being killed, undermined the entire process. Despite these concerns, the trial moved forward. Prosecutors presented documentary evidence from Saddam's own regime, including signed execution orders. Survivors of Dujal testified about their torture and imprisonment. The prosecution's case was overwhelming in terms of evidence. On November 5, 2006, the Iraqi Special Tribunal delivered its verdict. Saddam Hussein was found guilty of crimes against humanity for his role in the Dujal massacre. The sentence was death by hanging. 7 days later, an appeals court upheld the verdict. Under Iraqi law, the sentence had to be carried out within 30 days. The countdown had begun. In his final weeks, Saddam was held in a high-security section of Camp Cropper. According to accounts from Iraqi officials who visited him, including Mowaffaq al-Rubia, Iraq's national security advisor at the time, Saddam spent his time reading, writing, and praying. He refused to acknowledge guilt. He continued to present himself as Iraq's legitimate president. He wrote poetry and letters. In conversations with his lawyers and the few officials allowed to see him, he remained defiant. He told his lawyers he wanted to be shot by firing squad, which he considered an honorable military death, rather than hanged, which he saw as humiliating. His request was denied. On December 29, 2006, Saddam's lawyers were informed the execution would happen soon, though they were not given an exact time. Saddam himself was told that night. The next day was December 30th, which that year was the first day of Eid al-Adha, one of the most important holidays in the Islamic calendar. The timing was immediately controversial. Executing someone on a major religious holiday was seen by many as deliberately provocative. Some Iraqi officials later said the timing was necessary to meet the 30-day legal deadline. Others suspected it was intentionally chosen for symbolic reasons in Iraq's escalating sectarian conflict. The legal handover was crucial. Saddam had been in American custody, but the execution was to be carried out by Iraqis. American forces transported him to an Iraqi facility in the Qadamiyya neighborhood of Baghdad, an area strongly associated with Shiite militia groups. The site was a former military intelligence building that had been converted into a makeshift execution chamber. The Americans formally transferred custody to the Iraqis. At that point, American forces stepped back. Under the terms of the transfer, Saddam was now entirely under Iraqi control. What happened next would be an Iraqi operation, for better or worse. Accounts of Saddam's final hours come from several Iraqi officials who were present. According to Mowaffaq al-Rubaiyah, who witnessed the execution and later gave interviews to multiple news outlets including the BBC, Saddam was calm but defiant to the end. He refused a hood, wanting people to see his face. He was dressed in a black coat, white shirt, and dark trousers. As he was led into the execution chamber, witnesses reported he carried a Quran. Al-Rubaiyah and others described him as showing no obvious fear, maintaining the persona he had cultivated for decades, the strong man who would not break. But then something happened that was not part of the official plan. As Saddam stood on the platform with the noose being placed around his neck, voices in the room began to chant. They chanted the name Muqtada, Muqtada, Muqtada. This was a reference to Muqtada al-Sadr, a young, fiercely anti-American Shiite cleric whose militia, the Mahdi army, was a major force in Iraq's sectarian violence. The chant turned the execution chamber into a sectarian arena. These were not neutral representatives of the Iraqi state. These were partisan actors turning an execution into a political and religious statement. According to witnesses, Saddam responded with defiance. One account has him saying, "Is this how you show bravery as a man?" Reports of his final words vary slightly, but multiple sources, including al-Rubaiyah, confirm that Saddam said something dismissive toward his executioners and proclaimed the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. There is no God but God, and Mohammed is the messenger of God. Then the trap door opened. The official video released by the Iraqi government shows none of this. In that version, you see a silent, controlled procedure. Saddam is led in. The noose is placed. The execution happens. It is grim but orderly. The video cuts off before the actual moment of death. It was edited to present the execution as a sober, legally mandated act of justice. For a few hours, that was the only version the world saw. The Iraqi government and its American backers hoped this controlled narrative would hold. It did not. Within hours, a second video began circulating. This one was shot on a cell phone by someone in the execution chamber. The quality is poor. The image shakes, but the audio is clear, and what the audio reveals is explosive. You hear the chanting, Muqtada, Muqtada, Muqtada. You hear Saddam's voice, sharp and defiant. You hear what sounds like celebration after the trap door opens. This was not a solemn act of state justice. This was a sectarian killing carried out with triumphalism and taunts. The video spread across the internet at astonishing speed. News organizations, including the New York Times, quickly verified its authenticity. John F. Burns, the Times Baghdad bureau chief, reported on the video and the immediate fallout. The Iraqi government scrambled to respond, condemning the leak and promising an investigation into who had filmed and released it. But the damage was done. The leaked video validated every fear that Iraq's Sunni Arab population had about the new Shiite-dominated government. It confirmed that Saddam's execution was not about justice, but about revenge. It showed that even in the act of trying to close a dark chapter, Iraq's new leaders could not rise above sectarian hatred. International reaction was swift and harsh. The United Nations, European governments, and human rights organizations condemned not just the execution itself. Many were already opposed to the death penalty on principle, but the manner in which it was carried out. Philip Alston issued a strongly worded statement calling the proceedings surrounding the execution deeply disturbing. He noted that the chaotic, undignified nature of the execution undermined any claim that this was a legitimate act of justice. Even the United States, which had supported the trial and had custody of Saddam until the final hours, was forced into an uncomfortable position. The Bush administration had hoped Saddam's execution would be a turning point, a symbolic end to the old regime and a step toward stability. Instead, it became another symbol of how badly things were going in Iraq. American officials condemned the leaked video and the behavior of those in the execution chamber, but the fact remained that the U.S. had transferred Saddam to Iraqi custody, knowing full well the political climate. Some critics argued the U.S. bore moral responsibility for what happened, even if Americans were not in the room. For Iraq's Sunni Arab community, the execution and especially the leaked video had a radicalizing effect. Many Sunnis had never supported Saddam's regime or had suffered under it themselves. But they saw the execution as a humiliation of a Sunni Arab leader by a Shiite government backed by foreign occupiers. The sectarian taunts in the execution chamber were heard as a message: this is what will happen to you. In the months and years that followed, Iraq's sectarian civil war intensified. Sunni insurgent groups gained recruits. Shiite militias grew more powerful and brutal. The execution did not bring closure. It deepened the wound. Internationally, the leaked video sparked a broader conversation about justice, revenge, and the death penalty. Legal scholars pointed out that even if Saddam Hussein was guilty of horrific crimes, and the evidence was clear that he was, the manner of his trial and execution mattered. Justice is not just about the outcome. It is about the process. When the process is flawed, when it is marred by political interference, when it is conducted in an atmosphere of fear and sectarian hatred, the legitimacy of the verdict is compromised. This is not about sympathy for Saddam Hussein as an individual. It is about the principle that even the worst criminals deserve a fair trial because justice must be seen to be done. When it is not, it ceases to be justice. Philip Alston, in his capacity as UN Special Rapporteur, made this point clearly. He noted that international human rights law permits the death penalty only under the strictest conditions. The trial must be scrupulously fair. The defendant must have adequate legal representation. There must be no political interference. The execution itself must be carried out with dignity. None of these conditions, he argued, were fully met in Saddam's case. The rushed timeline, the murder of defense lawyers, the atmosphere of intimidation, and finally the sectarian spectacle of the execution itself all undermined the legitimacy of the process. Human Rights Watch reached similar conclusions. In their report judging Dujal, they acknowledged that the evidence against Saddam for the Dujal massacre was strong. But they emphasized that the strength of the evidence does not excuse a flawed process. They called for Iraq to address the serious deficiencies in its judicial system and to ensure that future trials would meet international standards. They also reiterated their opposition to the death penalty in all cases, noting that execution is irreversible, and that the risk of executing an innocent person or conducting an execution in a flawed manner can never be fully eliminated. For many observers, the two videos became a perfect metaphor for the gap between what Iraq's post-Saddam government aspired to be and what it actually was. The official video represented the ideal, a government of laws, conducting justice with solemnity and fairness. The leaked video represented the reality, a government fractured by sectarian hatred, unable to control its own security forces and more interested in revenge than justice. The fact that both videos existed, and that the leaked one so thoroughly contradicted the official narrative, meant there was no escaping the truth. In the years since, historians and political scientists have debated Saddam's execution endlessly. Some argue that given the scale of his crimes, execution was justified, and that focusing on procedural irregularities is a distraction. They point out that Saddam showed no mercy to his victims, and that the families of those he killed deserved to see justice done. Others argue that if a society wants to distinguish itself from tyranny, it must hold itself to a higher standard. That means fair trials, humane treatment of prisoners, and even for the worst criminals, a process that respects human dignity. This argument holds that the manner of Saddam's execution did not honor his victims. Instead, it dishonored the idea of justice itself. The leaked cell phone video also raised important questions about technology and information control in the 21st century. The Iraqi government tried to control the narrative by releasing only the official, sanitized version of the execution. But in an age of mobile phones and the internet, such control is nearly impossible. One guard with a cell phone undid the entire effort. This phenomenon has only become more pronounced in the years since. Governments and institutions can no longer rely on monopolizing information. The truth, or at least a version of it, will almost always come out. This has profound implications for how states conduct themselves, especially in sensitive situations like executions, military operations, or crackdowns on dissent. The assumption must now be that everything will be recorded and everything will eventually be seen. So, was Saddam Hussein's execution legitimate justice or a sectarian act of revenge? The answer is it was both, and that is the tragedy. The evidence of Saddam's guilt for the crimes he was convicted of was strong. The Dujal massacre happened. Documents bear his signature. Survivors testified. He deserved to be held accountable. But the process by which he was held accountable was deeply flawed. The trial did not meet international standards. The execution was conducted in a manner that dishonored the very concept of justice. And the sectarian taunts captured on that cell phone video revealed that for at least some of those in the room, this was not about the rule of law. It was about settling scores. This distinction matters because justice is not just a result, it is a process. It is not enough to punish the guilty. We must do so in a way that upholds our own values and principles. If we allow justice to become indistinguishable from revenge, we lose the moral authority that justice is supposed to convey. We also lose the opportunity for justice to serve its broader purposes, deterrence, accountability, and societal healing. Saddam's execution did none of those things. It did not deter future atrocities. It did not create a sense of accountability rooted in law, and it certainly did not heal Iraqi society. Instead, it deepened divisions and fed a cycle of violence that would consume Iraq for years to come. There is also the question of the death penalty itself. Regardless of the fairness of the trial, many human rights organizations and governments around the world oppose capital punishment on principle. The European Union, for example, has abolished the death penalty and considers its abolition a key human rights goal. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch both oppose the death penalty in all circumstances. Their reasoning is straightforward. The death penalty is irreversible. It has been applied unjustly and discriminatorily throughout history, and it does not demonstrably deter crime more effectively than life imprisonment. In Saddam's case, even those who believe he deserved the harshest punishment possible must grapple with the fact that his execution solved nothing. It did not bring back his victims. It did not stabilize Iraq. It did not even provide a sense of closure, because the manner of the execution was so controversial. Looking back nearly 2 decades later, the legacy of that December morning is complicated. Saddam Hussein, the dictator responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths, is gone. That is a fact. For many of his victims and their families, that fact alone carries weight. But the process by which he was removed and executed left scars of its own. Iraq's sectarian conflict, already terrible in late 2006, grew worse. The execution became a rallying cry for Sunni insurgents and a symbol of Shiite dominance for militias. The hope that removing Saddam would allow Iraq to heal proved tragically naive. His removal created a power vacuum. His execution, conducted as it was, inflamed the very divisions that might have been bridged. The international community also learned lessons, though whether those lessons have been fully internalized is debatable. The importance of legitimate, fair judicial processes was reinforced. The danger of allowing sectarian or political considerations to corrupt justice was laid bare. And the reality that in the modern age, information cannot be controlled became undeniable. The leaked video from Saddam's execution chamber was an early, stark example of a phenomenon we now see constantly. Official narratives are contested and contradicted in real time. This can be a force for accountability, shining light on abuses of power. But it can also be destabilizing, feeding disinformation and conspiracy theories. In Saddam's case, the leaked video revealed a truth that the official narrative tried to hide. But not every leaked or viral video does the same. Discerning truth in the information age requires critical thinking, verification, and a healthy skepticism of all sources, official and unofficial alike. The story of Saddam Hussein's execution is ultimately a story about the limits of justice in a broken system. Iraq in 2006 was a country in collapse. Sectarian violence raged. The government was weak and divided. American forces were struggling to contain an insurgency. In that context, expecting a trial and execution to be conducted with fairness and dignity was perhaps unrealistic. But that does not make the failures acceptable. It makes them tragic, because those failures had consequences. People died in the violence that the execution helped fuel. Families were torn apart. A society that desperately needed healing was pushed further into chaos. The two videos, the official and the leaked, will forever be linked. They are a reminder that there is often a gap between how events are presented and how they actually unfold. They are a reminder that justice, to be meaningful, must be more than a verdict. It must be a process that reflects our highest values. And they are a reminder that in the age of technology, the truth, however uncomfortable, will find its way out. For educators, historians, and anyone interested in justice and accountability, the execution of Saddam Hussein offers a sobering case study. It shows what happens when the desire for revenge overwhelms the commitment to justice.